Hello, everyone. I'm Tomika Anderson-Smith. I live in San Francisco and most recently have been working with Lightspeed Venture Partners on their strategy and operations side with talent specifically. I have a really unique background. I always start my introduction with that because I really delved in a lot of different areas. I started my career in the mid 2000s, really obsessed with the nonprofit sector. I saw the world hurting and realized that the sector made this great connection between those who were passionate about helping in very specific areas with the organizations that were addressing those specific needs. I always get asked, what part of nonprofit? Was it animals? Was it aging? Was it the unhoused? And quite honestly, my answer has always been all of it, but also none of it. Because what I care most about is the actual sector as an operational way to make those connections. I spent over a decade working with nonprofits in really all areas from fundraising, event planning, budgeting, program development, and even direct services. And I quickly found myself favoring those operational areas that we'll talk about more today, but specifically finance, HR, IT, and just general business operations. I moved into tech in 2018, and I joined as the second hire at a seed stage company in the fashion tech space. And there, as you can imagine, with startup number two, we had a small round of seed funding. I dove in and started building out all those pieces, HR, finance, IT, our kind of office. We needed a space to work, general operations for our tiny team. As we scaled, I also took on warehouse operations and facilities, inventory, and product management. And so I've since been working in operations and executive search in the VC ecosystem, most recently, as I said, at Lightspeed and also at Riviera Partners. And so I would say the theme across my career has been operations. And while perhaps not surprising to the two of you, but many people are surprised, I find startups and nonprofits very, very similar. You've got a whole bunch of really hardworking, smart, passionate people, usually under-resourced, but working towards some kind of really huge problem solving. And so I think to end my intro, what really drives me is truly helping people. And I think a lot of people don't quite get that, but I really care about helping people not in the spotlight, but letting them kind of flourish, be in the spotlight, and kind of handling all that stuff that's behind the scenes. So I've got almost 2 decades of building this infrastructure and enabling different organizations from tiny little local startups to big international startups to now, most recently at Lightspeed, one of the largest VC firms that is around. So that's a little bit on me.
That's amazing. It's so funny that you bring up nonprofit and startups being similar. Uh, that's the drum I bang on so often because I also come from a nonprofit background and they are so very similar in all the ways that you said. Well, it's so good to have you today. Thank you very much for joining us on Ops or Die and talking about why this is so important. And we just want to start off with what got you into operations? Because I know those stories for people on how they got here, how they got into operations are always different. So, did you intentionally set out for operations, or did you get sucked in, like so many of us, by just starting to fix things that you saw wrong, and all of a sudden you were operations?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. I'm a really big observer. I'm the people watcher, just kind of always listening. I participate a lot, but I also like to step back and listen. If you think about the water cooler conversations, especially with young employees back in the day that we were all in office of complaining about our bosses or complaining about how stupid something is, I kind of would pay attention to those things and be like, there are fixes for this. Like, why don't we fix it? But when I would look around to who should fix it, there was nobody there except me. And so, really early on in my career, even though I was often managing programs or doing something very specific, not in operations, I would notice gaps that were slowing down teams, creating a lot of frustration that just seemed silly to me. And so I would address them. I had a really wonderful mentor who was the executive director of a nonprofit who I was in graduate school at the same time as working with her, and she told me, she said, if there's ever anything that you want to learn, you're here to learn as kind of a graduate fellow. You're running programs, but you're also learning. Ask me. And 9 times out of 10, you probably can do it. So I would go and be like, I want to learn how to budget. Like, can I help you? And she would teach me and then pretty soon throw things my way. And so, especially as the little operational opportunities popped up, she was really great at letting me run with it. So I think that's definitely how I got into operations.
Yeah,
Nice.
and that is so exciting about someone telling you, okay, well, how can I can help? Because I know with a lot of especially younger executives that want to always navigate their path up, I'm also the person that tell them, ask if you can do something in an area for someone where they need help, and they're too busy working on it. So that's the best ways to help build those relationships, because it's all about relationships of trust. And I mean, what excites me quite a bit, and also about operations that touches so many things and all aspects of business. So you've moved between strategy, growth, and operations. So what's been your North Star throughout navigating that path, and what excites you about it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the North Star is definitely impact, and almost getting to ride along with impact that somebody else seems responsible for, but enabling them to be so. So whether it is, you said strategy, operations, or growth, I'm really drawn to roles where I can remove the friction and just create the opportunity for the team and the organization to thrive. I think some examples of that would be like at Lightspeed. I wasn't a partner, and I wasn't doing direct conversations with portfolio companies or candidates, but I was filling all the gaps to ensure that our team was helping set these portfolio companies up for success by finding a candidate that truly had the opportunity to make or break their entire company. If you have a Series A company who's hiring their first chief technology officer, if you make a bad hire, and bring that person on, onboard them, trust them with your stuff, and in 6 months they're not it. It can be really damaging for a small team and really demotivating, really frustrating. And as we know, so many startups fail. But if you put together the operations and infrastructure to set up the people that are doing the matchmaking in exec talent, in this case, to find only the best of the best that match and align with that need, and get rid of all that friction, it truly can help set these portfolio companies up for success. And that impact, even though when that hire is made, never is there a thank you, Tomika. Never is there a Tomika did this. I don't need that. It's really more of just knowing, cool, you guys are good to go. And this success, I have a small hand in it, which is a great feeling. So that impact, I think, would be the answer, Maria.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Love that. I love that. I love that. It is, I mean, operations in general is kind of a thankless position. It's you don't expect the thank yous. Let me put it that way. I think you get used to, it's your job to just make things easier, to make them better, to fix the issues and solve for them. And there's not a lot of thank yous and things like that. And so kind of off of that point where it's not a position where you really look for gratitude, there's also some battles that you go into in operations when you're pulling from that small pool of resources. Like you said, in startup nonprofits, there's a finite amount of resources. What's one kind of battle, internal push you had to make for that unsexy thing that you needed for operations that was critical, but it was really hard to explain to people why you needed it? So a time that happened, what happened, and did you win?
Yeah, that's a great one. I have lots of these examples. I think one that comes to mind is when I worked at Equal Rights Advocates, which is a national nonprofit legal services firm that's advocating for women and girls that have been assaulted or harassed in the workplace, and working on policy and litigation. So, really heavy mission, really important mission. My big fight was when I got there, they were doing all of their time tracking, which for the lawyers, as you know, lawyers do great, time tracking. In this case, it wasn't billable hours as much as it was for grant reporting and really crucial reporting. Everything was done on paper. And I would, at the end of each kind of pay period, I can picture it still. I would walk through the office and be like, hey, like lawyer so and so, I need your timesheets like every single month without fail. And
Oh,
so our entire legal team was still using paper timesheets. That takes a long time. So, we're sitting here trying to fight for gender justice, but we want to ask attorneys to change how they're tracking these hours. And for them, it felt like we were spending time on bureaucracy and not fighting for the clients. So to them, of course, super unsexy, like not okay. And so really it was, the resistance happened right away and it was pretty vocal. I think the legal director and senior attorneys were just like, this is fine. Like, we don't have time to learn new technology. We're good. This is how we've been doing it. We're fine. But so how I focused on was, or how I won was, I focused on our mission. Like, why are we here? And not the technology. So we are here to help women and girls win some big battles and be advocated for, to both change policy at the state, local levels, and also to seek justice for people that have been wronged. So you're spending literally an hour per attorney per week on this. Wouldn't you rather spend that fighting for that justice? Here's how I can make that happen for you. And so it was just a giant redirect. And it wasn't without its battles, it wasn't without some hard moments, but I was able to basically show them with the data, here's how you get your time back. Give me a little bit of time right now and attention on something that makes you feel really stressed out, but give me some trust, and we're going to get back to the mission that matters. And in the end, I mean, even 6 months after, everybody was just like, oh yeah, I cannot believe we used to do it that way. And I, made sure there was plenty of training. I used one attorney kind of as a guinea pig, that I got their buy-in and was able to get them on board, and then they could help advocate to other people to be like, oh yeah, it wasn't that hard. Find some time. And some coffee, bribes, and treats also help. So that was another solution.
Gotta have the bribe.
yeah, and I also like the fact, sometimes if you can't get the message through, change the messenger. And that also, if it's one of them who is like, oh
Hmm.
my goodness, this is so much better, they become the advocate and help proliferate it as well. So that's that's always good, because yeah, there's tons of different, I think, battles with operations. So how do you deal with resistance, especially from founders or executives who undervalue operations? Because a lot of the time it's just seen as, oh, this is the unsexy grudge thing to do, and we don't really see a value of it in why we should be doing it.
Yeah. I think in my experience, I've learned that this resistance is usually coming from one of two places. Either they've had very specific bad experiences with operations, or they don't see a connection. And so they're so down in the weeds of product or of whatever, fundraising, whatever their priority is that they don't see the direct connection between having really excellent operations and those business outcomes that are what they are responsible for. And so, what I try to do is lead with results and not process. Because the minute you get process oriented, like if I actually showed you, hey, how do you track your email? Like if I actually showed you within 2 minutes of me explaining, even you who are operationally minded would be like, okay, whatever. But if I say, here's what works for me, and kind of work backwards, it's a much better way to make that connection. So I'm trying to think of an example. Like so for hiring, if hiring is taking too long, and if you're not getting the people that you want, what you can do is say, okay, if we streamline this process and we close that engineer hire faster, then we're going to be able to give you back all these hours on the hiring process because your engineer's already in play. So it's about the streamlining, and we kind of guide them again, results first, back into what the operational process is. And at the end of the day, they don't care about the details in those senses. So you have to establish trust, and you have to be able to say, and sometimes do things and ask for forgiveness later. And as I'm sure we have not even talked about yet, but the invisibility of operations, that most of the time it's only addressed when something isn't working and not when things are really seamless. And so try to make operations invisible when it's working well.
Yeah, I just love the theme of it always boils down to giving time back. And,
Hmm.
it reminds me of a situation I had where there was a lot of inefficiencies on just customer onboarding, and the processes were very poorly designed in doing that. So there was a high drop-off rate, and then I literally threw the technical team, I divided the product team to participate in the process to actually go and do the work what these poor customers who's needing to deal with these systems had to do.
Hmm.
And my goodness, just exposing them to the pain of what others feel and how ineffective it is. They came up with answers very quickly. And that was a case for, okay, we're just going to do it because some aspects of business didn't want to participate. And their view was, oh, you guys just need to implement what we tell you to do. And we're like, well, there's better ways. And we just literally pulled the plug and did it. And lo and behold, it was so effective in how we cut fluff out of the processes and made it very sharp and targeted with real customer feedback, that acquisitions jumped up the first week more than 30%. So yeah, no one could complain about it. But yeah, there
Hmm.
was never a thank you to the team who really
Course
did
not.
that.
Of course not. I have met on very few circumstances, and the CTO at the startup I worked at was wonderful at this and spoiled me. But one of the practices he would do is every now and then he would ride along with the operations team because he wanted to track where the hard pieces were. And for us, we were a courier organization driving cars all around San Francisco with deliveries for women, specifically fashion items. And so he would ride along and he would watch everything from how I routed where the driver was going, what the interaction was with the concierge or whoever was at, if you think again, pre-COVID, the Google security, Square, down on Market, Uber, all these places that had very different mail rooms and everything. So he watched and again took the role of observer to see where the pain points of the end users of our systems, internal systems we were building, and then also of the customer who at the end of the day was receiving a bag, good, bad, or ugly. And then he was able to ask questions and spend time updating the engineering team based on what he saw. And I think that that is a rare occurrence. But when I see it happening, there's that respect for operations from a not. And I mean, I think engineering can be operational in some ways, in a lot of ways. But I was really spoiled by him and seeing him in this leadership role, and him taking the time to listen to my team and me, and it made a world of difference.
Yeah. I think that's a piece that um, sometimes it's because founders don't have a lot of extra time, going back to that time issue. And sometimes it's because they're focused on so many things, but I think there's real value in looking at what the stakeholders internally in your customer are experiencing. And I think leadership is distracted sometimes. And it's a lot of the reasons why operations get seen as admin stuff, and isn't really seen as that strategic opportunity it can be. And so when you're looking at operations and you're working with these leaders, these founders, these C-suites, how do you define strategic operations to get them away from that idea that it is just that admin stuff in the background?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it took me a while to understand because operations is such a large term, and it can mean something different at even at each org within a company. But I would say that for me, strategic operations is really about building infrastructure that enables the organization to achieve the biggest goals. It's kind of the difference between putting out small fires every day that are always going to happen versus creating systems and anticipating those fires so that you're able to unlock these new capabilities and keep pushing forward as opposed to spending time only on the fire. And Maria and I, when we met a few weeks ago, I shared this before, but I like to think about a company or an organization as this giant tree. Founders are focused on they're growing out the long, luscious branches, their blossoms, one of those huge tulip trees that it's just stunning and growing. They want to just keep adding and growing and growing and growing. Um, because that's how they reach more people, more customers. They're enhancing that product. But they rarely look at the ugly parts of the tree, that trunk and the roots that are hidden, that are invisible. And the problem is that if those aren't healthy and strong, the branches aren't going to grow as fast. And worse, if they're rotten, that whole tree has the potential to topple. So if you think about strategic operations as we're not just going to be like, oh, this branch isn't growing. Let's go find the source and slap a band-aid on it or water it a little bit more. Instead, it's ensuring that the trunk and the roots are super healthy, have great potential, and are being tended to so that there's never any question that the product or the customer experience, those beautiful blossoms, have the opportunity to continue to grow. And really, if the founder just put some trust in the operational people they put in place and says, I don't want to look at the ugly stuff. That's your job. But I know that there's a potential for it to be there. So that's your job to make sure that it's not ugly and that it's healthy. That enables them to go back into the tree, the pretty tree area and help that organization or company do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful image, because it's so true. And it's the leaders don't need to be deep in the roots. Maybe they shouldn't be. Not every CEO, every founder needs to be focused on the roots. They do need to be focusing on those expansion points, but the growth areas. But they need to make sure someone's taking care and that the roots are healthy and strong and the trunk is vital. Because lightning may always happen, but letting your roots rot and then falling over is just, it's not a great place to be. And it's where we see so many startups now. So many.
Yes.
And I like the analogy as well with, the root system is really the life system of the tree. It feeds the tree, it nurtures the tree. And if the root system is not healthy, the tree shows disease very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But also if something, as Katie says, happened to that tree, and this is also a journey with startups, sometimes you need to pivot, which means sometimes the tree gets cut.
Yep.
But again, new growth will then come out from where that tree might have been cut, and new life starts, and new opportunities start. So, but without that strong foundational root system or operation system, it will be very hard even to pivot into new areas. So thank you for sharing that. That's a really great analogy. So in your experience, I mean, when we also talk about growth companies or early growth stage startups, when do they actually need to start taking operations seriously in your view?
That's a tricky question. I think that, of course, it depends on the organization, what the product is. In my case, for my startup, I was the number two hire because it was so operational. We were dealing with a ton of different brands and products, lots of logistics, and so kind of the business operations that we had weren't only internal; they were external. So in our case, it was really early on. But I think in general, in my experience, I think you kind of hit an inflection point or between 10 and 15 employees where informal systems that kind of got that early traction, that fun startup vibe that attracts the people, the real entrepreneurs that want to be part of something new. That's when the founders start getting sucked into more operational issues over what they should be working on, which is the product or the customer experience. And that's a big signal. I think the cost of waiting too long can be really, really high. And I've seen some companies that are up to, 25 or 30 employees that, you know, they start investing in ops, but by then they're dealing with compliance issues. They've got retention problems. They're seeing burnout by really valuable employees. And then founders just get completely overwhelmed. And I think that similar to in music, which is what is in my background, the geniuses in music, the Mozarts, the Beethoven, were so amazing at the one area that they were working in, but they would be complete nut jobs elsewhere. I think founders, many of our founders are similar because they're so, so, so good at that big area that they want to do. Many of them, when it comes to operations, not only are they not interested, oftentimes they don't have that mind for it. And they shouldn't have to. And so if you wait too long and you're starting to put a genius founder who's a technical founder who really wants to be living in the code, working with his technical team, and he's worried about compliance policy around, okay, we're over the 15-person point, but we need to make sure we're following these specific California rules. And we made a hire in Florida and we aren't paying taxes. And it can get really, really discouraging and really, really ugly really quickly. So yeah, I think really it's about the 10 to 15 point where and it doesn't even have to be if you have product market fit yet, or doesn't need to be that you've gotten a certain amount of funding yet. It's more of what your organization looks like and starting to put in policies and process and systems in play that are supporting that team as it begins to hopefully grow.
And and I think it's important to also start bringing it as early as you can, because we also have now seen with some companies that we work with that yeah, they just literally close around, and that's one of the first things because that's when all the stuff comes, which takes up a
Do
lot
you
of
have a
their
bank
time.
account?
Yeah. You have a bank account, yes.
Who has access to the bank account? What's
Oh
the
yeah.
routing number?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
and then basically they can spend so much time just on it and all the legal, aspects to have set up the company structure correctly. Does it comply with how
Hmm.
my investors are sending the money over? That it becomes overwhelming quite quickly, where they really need to focus more on customer conversations and product. So yeah, the earlier the better, and that's also when you can start putting in clean foundations.
And it doesn't have to be full time. And I think that's exactly
Yeah.
what the problem that you are addressing in your work is. I think a lot of founders go like, I don't want a COO, or I don't want a director of HR. You don't need one. You
Yeah.
can go out and find somebody who's an expert at this kind of smaller area and use them without dedicating a huge amount of budget and even having to deal with somebody else who wants to come in and even maybe do more or challenge certain things. That just comes in and says, hey, I want to make sure all my legal stuff is here and ready to go. I want to make sure that payroll's running properly so that my people get paid. Like whatever those small, again, unsexy, kind of ugly foundational things, plug them in and spend a lesser amount by hiring the experts to come in and specifically focus on that is key. And I think I would say invest in operations before you feel like you need it, because by the time that pain is really obvious, you're already behind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also I've seen huge conflict happen where everything was done manually, and the stress that it, as you say, especially for
Burnout.
people who don't
Mhm.
want to, their mindset is just not around operations, and the stresses and conflict it can bring in teams, which can literally destroy a company.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I talked to a startup the other day who we were just chatting, and they were telling me that they don't have an operations person. And I know this company has more than 30 people in it already, and they don't have
Wow.
anyone handling operations. And I was like, who does your operations stuff? And they said, well, our chief of engineering and our CEO share HR. I was like, oh no. This is this is not a good look. This is going to end in,
No.
especially with a California company. As we all know, HR is problematic at best. You know, that's the piece that I'm like, not only is your of engineering not supposed to be uh, messing around with HR, like has other things to do, as does your CEO, but also like this is such a compliance heavy area. It's terrifying to split it in general. Like let's discuss. Let's discuss where
Hmm.
your resources are because they also don't feel ready for a COO, which I totally understand. I'm like, that's not the options on the table. It's not a two branch path. There's a lot of different ways this can go. Um, and I think that's one of the things they don't understand is they see the operations leadership, it has to be a C-suite position. We need a COO. We need someone to just handle it. And I think operations leadership has a lot of different options. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of different resources for startups out there. Speaking of the operations leadership, what is the most misunderstood part what do you think the most misunderstood part of being an operations leader is?
I would say the most misunderstood across the board is just how if operations is working effectively, it's invisible. And so you're not going to see metrics in the same way. You're not going to see huge wins in the same way. It's more like we mentioned or talked about earlier. If it's not working, then there's a fire. But when it is working, you kind of don't think about it. I think a story I tell often is when I worked at my startup, the one of the co-founders and the CEO was one of my good friends. And we were, building things together. I was learning about the for-profit world for the first time, doing so many things, and I started realizing that she and I weren't checking in very much anymore. And partially, I was like, I miss you. Like, hello, like I'm here too. And I kind of got mad at her and I said, like, I see you checking in on marketing. I see you going to get a beer after work with the brand director. I see you doing these things. Like, why are you not checking in on me? And she kind of sheepishly, apologized and was like, I guess because I don't have any issues to bring to you because you're just handling stuff. When I throw something out like, oh crap, I didn't pay our, Delaware taxes because that's where we're incorporated, and I never told you that you needed to do this, and you sent one email, like she would never hear about it again because it just got done, it got filed, it was probably in her email where I would say, FYI, this is where this lives now. It's on the compliance calendar. Thank you for sharing. She would never have to worry about it again. And so, in a weird way, it was like this beautiful compliment that I was doing really well in my work because she kind of never had an agenda for me because it was just getting done. And so, I think for me, the most misunderstood part is that I was doing really well, but it was like we weren't ever kind of checking in and talking about it. And I think you can have better ways. We were, really scrappy, really small. And I think also partially because we were friends, she was like, she knows that I'm a hot mess and I'm dealing with 88.5 other things. She'll be fine with it. But I think, when you streamline different processes, um, things just are working and people just expect it to be that way. And it's almost like nobody cares unless you're in trouble. And so I think that's probably the thing we don't talk very much about. And I think it takes a certain kind of person to be okay with that. And that's something I tell a lot of mentees or my teams when I've had different people work for me, as I say, operations is thankless in a lot of spaces. But we as a team can make sure that we're affirming and thanking each other. But are you cut out for this? Because it is. I've even had people look at me during a really big event and be like, man, it just all came together. And I want to go, really? Like, you think this just kind of happened? Like, you don't realize that we've been planning this for months? And no, they don't. They really think that everything just kind of came together and they kind of forget that there's a team with intention behind it. And sometimes luckily, I don't have really high ego and I can just be like, you know what? I'm glad you love it.
Yeah, it's and what I like about it, it is it brings in the feeling of stuff just works. As I say,
Hmm.
the car
Yeah,
engine
we
just
don't even
runs.
need you.
We don't even need you
Yeah.
until that moment something changes and the wheels come off. Then guess who's the first people that being screamed at?
Yeah.
So yeah, so how do you plan for, because as I say sometimes it pivots, and what would actually cause the wheels sometimes to come off, start coming off, and how can you start planning around that, that would avoid those specific moments.
I think it's, again, being an observer and thinking about things in a more even engineering way of, what's working, what's not, and how can I impact it now? I think it's constantly auditing things. And we all can get sucked into the things that we maybe care most about. I often say my area within operations that I thrive in and I really like doing the most is people operations and then a little bit of finance, honestly. Um, but so we can kind of get obsessed in little areas. But if you think about making sure that you're looking holistically across whatever operations means at your company and just kind of always doing little check-ins, popping in and doing a little audit, if it's, financial, if it's checking the HR files, if it's doing a quick coffee with somebody and saying, hey, how are you liking your time here? And just constantly asking little questions to gauge kind of what do a temperature check, I guess. And I think when that doesn't happen, when the wheels do fall off, you're really behind because you might have other areas where the wheels are about to fall off and it can cascade. Whereas if you are kind of poking around a little bit all the time and saying, here's my priority of what I'm building, what I'm changing, what I'm fixing right now, but I'm still touching base in these other areas, it allows you to just constantly be aware of stuff. And I think for somebody like me who can be a little bit of a perfectionist and I want to fix things right away because I hate when things are messy, prioritization is really important too, to say, okay, what is critical, what is not critical, but I'm still aware of the non-critical issues, and kind of focusing on what matters most that ties into that direct impact and the end result of your product or your customers.
Yeah, and I mean from also having worn a hat of a product manager and head of product myself, one of the things that I always insisted on is you bring all the other business function people in right at the design phase,
Mm.
which include operations, because a lot of the time the operations people have perspectives of just, you know, accounts receivable, accounts payable, which the financial guys have as well, but they understand the processes of how this happened. And if suddenly that product changes dramatically and anyone forgets about that process, that also wouldn't sit down well. So is in all aspects, as you say, that having that constant communication and checking in. But I would always suggest that always when you're looking at designing products, don't just think it's the product and the technical people that are the only people that should look at that. Bring in the other cross-functional people operations into the mode as well.
You also leave yourself up to a lot of at risk, right? And so it's again the not sexy part, but so you're off building product. Are your financial systems in a place? Do you have internal controls set up to protect you from? I know we, especially startups, a lot of times we bring in friends, family, people that we know, we trust them even at the very beginning, you have to be really careful and say, you know what? This is not our money. This is investor money that is being given to us. We need to take good care of it. It can be things like, do we put all of our money into one account that's not FDIC compliant? Or do we, do a CD ladder? How do we think about these things? Because what if something crazy happens? I have a sad, but it was fascinating example from a nonprofit that I worked in where there were no internal controls. Our budget reviewing processes were really, really, really weak. And I started kind of just noticing little things. And I did an audit and basically found not one, but two different employees, long-standing employees, people that were admired and loved by the entire organization that were stealing. And this wasn't $50 here or there. At the end, between the two, it was over six figures. Now, at a nonprofit, that's not even investor money. That's stakeholder money, and those are your donors. That's money that has been donated for a specific cause, and that money vanished being spent on things because we didn't have somebody double checking our monthly credit card statements, and then finance was looking at stuff and trying to make the most of it, but it was given to them and they were like, okay, we'll just make our best guess. This is probably valid. And it took very little for me to find it. But what the hard part was, again, was picking it up and saying, hey, something's wrong here and we need to fix this ugly problem, but we also need to protect ourselves in the future. And if any of that had been done in the early days, and I think startups especially, we want to believe that everyone's here for the right reason. There's people justify doing bad things so easily, and burnout is so true, especially nonprofits. There's the nonprofit, I think it's the fraud triangle they talk about, where you have access, you feel burnt out, and I can't remember what the third one is, but people justify it all the time. And I think that's a huge opportunity for operations to say, there's risk here, and you're leaving yourself open to a lot of not great stuff that can tarnish the founders for the rest of their careers. And we've seen those startups that have fallen apart and there's been fraud and been bad stuff. Operations is not a band-aid for that. It's a truly systemic fix if you take a little bit of time to do that in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. And to fill in that other triangle, motivation. So if you
That's
have
what it is.
a need, yeah, no worries. I spent a lot of time on this myself, working in um, ops and financial and HR, also in a nonprofit. And it really doesn't take that much. And it's not it doesn't make a person a terrible person, because honestly, most people who have the opportunity and can rationalize and are motivated because they have needs will commit fraud. So the people you trust, the people, a lot of times when, especially when you're going from a bootstrap company to a pre-seed to having that investor money, and the money goes from being money you put in to being money someone else put in.
Mhm.
That's a huge issue, right? And a lot of people have that problem with, like, realizing, that this is company money. Like, it's not the same as your money. It's not a pass-through entity. It's a corporation. Like, this is a
Yep.
whole different animal. Um, but I think that systemic solve from the operations side is so important. It's not the band-aid. It's not the, let's witch hunt these people and tie them up. It's, how did this happen? Because
Hmm.
if they aren't given the opportunity, then the triangle dissolves. Even if they have the motivation and the rationalization, it's the opportunity. And
Yep.
that's where operations can come in and close the system. Um,
Exactly.
so, one of the things I love talking about, and that we talked about actually before we started recording, is where operations are going, and the use of AI and some of the other resources that are coming through in technology. And so, as far as closing these loops, creating really good systems, where do you see operations going in the next 5 years, with or without AI, or the uses of AI within operations? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time. As we were talking about, there's so much out there with AI. It can honestly be a little bit overwhelming. But the general theme that I see is that what AI has the potential to do is help, especially when you only have a few operational leaders, especially at these early companies, or you're a team of one. It allows the manual labor to go down so that they can focus more on the strategic operations. So, as remember, we define just strategic operations as thinking about solving for things that haven't even happened yet, as opposed to just being reactive. So it's being proactive. I think AI allows you to do that because you spend more time thinking, communicating, observing with the different parts of the company. in order to really understand, hey, we're more at risk here, and we need to build this out. Or, our team is really susceptible to burnout. So we really need to set up a people program that is honoring the cultural experience, whatever it may be, and really focusing on that instead of sitting there reconciling, doing things by hand, having to worry about disconnect. It allows for AI to come in and fill that gap and kind of be an additional team member. I don't think AI will ever take the place of operational leaders, but I think it can really boost what they're there to do. So if you just think about companies that are manually tracking expenses, reconciliations, pulling together reports for fundraising, for whatever investor relations, all that stuff. AI can handle all that repetitive work, and then these leaders can spend time on the human-centered problems that only a human could do.
Yeah, no,
And
I
and
definitely agree. I think one of the things, sorry, Maria, one of the things I wanted to bring up as part of that conversation, I say, I really see an opportunity in AI and the use cases and the different platforms coming out for documentation of operations.
Mhm.
I think that's a big fail point as well for startups and small companies is documenting what's happening, what the processes are, what the systems are, things like that. And there's a lot of use case and tools using AI to make that easier for teams as well. So I'm really excited to see that start to come on board in the next 5 years, because I think that's a place where we all sometimes forget the need to write down what we're doing.
And and
Exactly.
and one of the aspects what excites me about AI and operations, right, is because operations is so focused on driving efficiencies, and AI can help with that. There's a new role I think that's popping up for operations, and it's really being the AI educators for the rest of the company on how to utilize these tools
Hmm.
and being more efficient and helping people to also, as you say, maybe create their own GPTs in what they are doing. So for me, that's sort of a new aspect of operations, which the best part of the organization who can become that AI educator is the operations team.
I love that. And I think a good way to think about it is we've all been sharing a document, say we're in Google spreadsheet and or sitting with somebody as you're working through a data set and you see somebody else do a shortcut that you don't know about. That's like my some of my favorite times of my
How
collaborative
did you do
work where
that?
yeah, how'd you do that? Because we all have a different little set, and I think AI has different sets of areas where we're being really efficient, but sometimes we're not communicating that. And so again, like my inbox, I've used multiple inboxes in Google since I got Google. And every time somebody sees if my computer's up, they're like, what is going on there? What are you doing? And I'm like, oh, well, I set it up so things filter into certain buckets before I even get to read the email. So it's already organized. And this was like long before the big AI push. But people seeing that would be like, oh, how'd you do that? Show me. And so I think that's what's really great about I don't think there's one perfect AI solution, but I think probably it lies in what you're talking about, Maria, of having who's your AI expert that's learning all that's out there and then saying, we don't need all of this, but we here at this specific portfolio company or nonprofit or what have you, we can use this, and this, and I'm going to work on it and then I'm going to teach. I mean, it's even the timesheet example. It's saying, hey, I'm going to bring this to you, and then we're going to stop for a minute, focus on this. And when you go back to your mission critical work, you're going to be that much more efficient.
Nice.
Yep.
Beautiful. So one last question. What's one thing before we end this podcast today? What's one thing you tell every founder listening about why ops is the growth engine they've been sleeping on?
I think that they need to understand it's not overhead. It's truly a multiplier, right? So every hour you spend building the correct operational foundation and that infrastructure gives you back that exponential time and capability, especially if you're a growth company and you're trying to scale. I think I think what a lot of founders don't understand is when you have bad operations, it doesn't just slow you down a little bit, it actually caps your potential. So if your hiring takes forever, you are missing out on market opportunities that come and go. If you don't fire fast, if you have the wrong person in a role and you kind of let them sit there because you're not sure what you might get in trouble for, you might not get in trouble for it because you kind of don't know because you don't have a person who can quick do the research and make sure that you're an expert when it comes to this situation. That person sits in that spot and you don't get the better person into that spot. And so it caps your potential. And so I think really understanding as a founder how to treat operations as a strategic advantage, implementing it from the beginning, even in a smaller capacity. Again, fractional work, I think, is a huge opportunity for founders right now to really to dive into. And everybody else is going to be scrambling to fix their operational, the fires, the stuff that they're not executing on well, the stuff that's holding them back. But if you have somebody that's ready and waiting for those things that are going to pop up, this is the nature of business, it truly will allow the potential to be endless.
Love that.
Amazing. Tomika, talking to you was so fun. I love the way you think about operations. I love the background and all the information you gave. Thank you so much for being part of Ops or Die. And let us know if you'd like to come back because I think we'd love to have you.
It has been such a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell, and I love that it feels like operations is gaining the traction and respect that it has always deserved. But I love what you're both doing to make it more accessible to people that are newbies around ops and really putting it to great work and helping some of these amazing companies get their products out there that can really change the world.
Yeah, thank you. And if people want to get hold of you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn. That's where I am a lot these days, and happy to talk more about operations, anything or nonprofit or music. Like I said, when I started, I've got a really quirky background that I love, so happy to talk about pretty much anything.
I love it. You'll
Thank
find
you.
all the links and Tamika's information in the show notes and or the comments below, the description below. Like, subscribe, follow us, and let us know your ops problems and what you think about ops in the comments section. Thank you so much.
Thank you.